Now, I lead the Leadership Roundtable program here at the Chamber. Welcome. Thank you again for your patience. It is much appreciated. Obviously, none of this has been ideal this morning, but we've got to roll with what technology throws at us. So let's go ahead and get started. We are super excited to hear the survey report details from Deloitte. They've done a phenomenal job, and it's going to be a really interesting presentation. So I'm going to pass it along to Dennis and Gina to explain a little bit more about the Roundtable program and what Deloitte has to offer.
Do you want me to be on?
Yep. Here's Dennis.
Out of nowhere, I suddenly appear. It's amazing. So I am Dennis Devlin. Along with Gina Bonar, we share a couple of different volunteer positions. One is to be, we are co-chairs of the CMO Roundtable program, which is a partnership between the Cincinnati USA Regional Chamber and the Cincinnati chapter of the American Marketing Association. We are also on both on the American Marketing Association Cincinnati chapter's board of directors. We share the responsibilities for being co-VPs of the executive marketer community. So just briefly, the community is a broader sort of pool of senior marketing executives in the Cincinnati area. For the AMA, the CMO Roundtable program resides within that community. And so let me tell you just a little bit about the program. I've been involved in it since we launched it in the fall of 2014. So I've been doing it for a while. And Gina has joined me this year in helping to facilitate meetings and other things. Yes, there's Gina's hand. So the CMO Roundtable program meets with some intimate meetings every other month, so 6 times a year for 2.5-hour sessions where we share best practices, also address challenges that are common for heads of marketing, as well as trying to leverage opportunities. So the power, I think, of the Roundtable program resides primarily in sharing different perspectives and experiences with others in the group. And we have some of our members here, like Kyle Shoemate from Von Lehman CPAs, and some others. So, and then the executive marketer community allows us, from the AMA standpoint, to have some additional programming beyond the CMO Roundtable. So it includes some receptions that we will hold where we invite some of our speakers to our major events to do a Q&A, for example, providing exclusive access for the people in the executive marketer community. And we also do a couple events a year like the one this morning, where I like to refer to them as learning events. So lots of different opportunities. And for those who lead the marketing efforts of their respective company or organization, certainly welcome you to, after the program, certainly could ask either Gina or myself for more details around that. With that, I will turn it over to Gina to talk a little bit about, maybe a little bit about today's program,
And I'm back.
and some other things if you wish.
I don't think I have other things to talk. Thank goodness we built in time for networking, right? Because otherwise we'd be way off schedule, but we're pretty much on schedule, oddly enough, although I'm sure, especially for those of you online, you don't really feel like we're on schedule. But that being said, we're going to go ahead and get the program started with Deloitte, and we're really excited to have Giselle and Tim here. Giselle Prego leads global engagement for Deloitte's Global Marketing Trends Report. She supports various elements of Deloitte's CMO program, enabling marketing executives to adapt to the shifting technology landscape and drive revenue growth, which we're all into, right? And Tim Murphy is the Director of Research and Insights for the Deloitte CMO program, and he focuses on emerging marketing trends and CMO dynamics within the C-suite, and is the orchestrator of this fabulous research report that the two of them are going to be talking about and sharing, I think, 7 big trends with you today. So I'm going to ignore that scary noise right now and turn it over to Giselle. It looks like is first on screen. And thank you very much for being here.
Oh, thank you, and good morning, everyone. The joys of hybrid experiences, right? I want to first thank the Cincinnati AMA and Regional Chamber for the invitation and for organizing this event. It's a great honor for us to be joining you virtually and participating in this leadership roundtable. Tim and I are here to brief you on our latest research, Deloitte's 2022 Global Marketing Trends. But first, I'd love to kick us off with a short video to give you a sense of what the report is about in the case you're not familiar.
It's gonna show up on screen. We don't have sound.
Giselle, it looks like the sound isn't working, so maybe we'll have to just skip the video and jump right into it.
There's something about these brands that's different. I want to see inside their playbook.
I wish I knew what gives leading brands the edge.
Now's your chance to get access to today's high-growth brands that aren't just recovering from last year's disruption, but thriving. Deloitte's 2022 Global Marketing Trends Report is out, revealing deep insights mined from more than 1,000 C-suite executives. Uncover the behaviors that separate leading companies from the competition. If high-growth brands are 66% more likely to see purpose as a means to guiding employee decision-making, how can you turn meaning into momentum? If they're 1.9 times more likely to have diversity, equity, and inclusion-related talent objectives, how can inclusion impact your next move? With 61% shifting to a first-party data strategy, what lessons can you apply to your data evolution? If 75% of executives say they'll invest in more hybrid experiences over the next 12 months, where can you leverage emerging channels? From honest observations to business building breakthroughs, the 7 trends from the 2022 Global Marketing Trends Report let you in on the high growth strategies that are key to thriving in our era of customer centricity. Are you ready? Explore the full report today.
All right, so you'll have 2 personal exploration guides this morning. So this year marks the 3rd anniversary of the Global Marketing Trends Report, which is a product of Deloitte's Chief Marketing Officer CMO program. My colleague Tim Murphy is the head of research and insights for the CMO program team, which we're both part of, and I was lucky enough to be on the core team that drove the creation of this year's report. And we're really excited to be here today to delve into findings from the research. And I believe we have some dedicated time to answer questions you may have related to the content later on this morning. So the report was created for CMOs, senior marketers, and those charged with building dynamic customer experiences like yourselves to navigate the constantly evolving world around us. And at a high level, we believe if the last year was about recovering from an unprecedented shock, this year is about responding and for those best positioned, thriving. So in terms of numbers, we polled about 1,100 executives from 5 countries and 11,500 consumers across the globe. And one thing we're particularly proud of this year is, yes, we wanted to make sure the report was data-driven, which is why we conducted the 2 surveys, but we didn't just use data. We also had really lengthy discussions with almost 20 CMOs or Chief Customer Experience Officers to co-create the trends. So we allowed them to react to results from the surveys and let their real life experiences shape many of our recommendations. And in my role as the global engagement lead, I worked across 40 different member firm countries to make sure we facilitated conversations with dynamic executives outside of the US as well. So we have a truly global perspective captured here and really insightful thoughts coming from leading brands. So by expanding the lens to address our people, data, environments, and experiences, we identified 7 trends that marketers and customer experience leaders should be thinking about over the next 12 to 18 months. And as we explore the trends this year, they can be grouped into 3 categories: people, data, and experience. Further, one reoccurring theme you'll see throughout, high growth brands, which we categorize as 10% plus in annual growth, are activating many of these trends differently than their lower growth peers. So what are the 7 trends? I'll start us off with the 3 trends in our people category, and then I'll pass it over to Tim, who will cover the last 4 trends in our data and experience categories. So our first, and I think one of our most powerful trends, is purpose. When we polled consumers across 8 categories to understand why they purchased from a specific brand, we found that most chose the brand because they had a low price point or high quality. And we've been told that's the reason people make purchases since the beginning of time, but we were surprised that other reasons like sustainability, addressing social inequities, and data privacy weren't more prevalent. Does that mean purpose is more hype than reality for consumers? Not necessarily. The real truth is that people do care, it's just a little more nuanced. In fact, price and quality are really just commodity features at this point, just table stakes, but purpose does matter in a more individualized manner. For instance, a third of consumers under the age of 25 say sustainability is a top 3 purchasing criteria in health and beauty. A quarter say data privacy is a top purchasing criteria in banking. And most recently, 40% say providing a safe customer experience is important in travel. And for marketers, who's better positioned to understand what really matters for consumers and making sure the brand's purpose is aligned to it than the CMO? But we also see from our executive survey that purpose takes an entire village. It's a holistic enterprise endeavor, and I'll give you some stats to back that. While high growth and low growth brands see purpose as a means to inspire product and service delivery at a similar rate, 66% versus 71% respectively, high growth brands are actually 66% more likely to see purpose as a means to guiding employee decision making, and 41% more likely to have purpose drive the corporate social responsibility investment strategy. In other words, purpose isn't done in isolation. These brands are truly walking the walk throughout the entire organization. And we'll take one of the executive interviews we did. Carol Carpenter, the Chief Marketing Officer at VMware, for example, she explained that they have a big commitment around sustainability. In line with that, at their physical events, they moved to all recyclable giveaways. Everyone loves a t-shirt, but how many t-shirts end up in the landfill or giveaway pile? So they're trying out other ways to thank customers. Doesn't have to be another t-shirt or another pen. So being thoughtful across all your touch points is important, and that doesn't just mean with the customer. Another example Carol shared, she let us know they had been doing a ton of virtual executive briefings, obviously during COVID, and what they do is make donations. So they plant a tree for every virtual briefing with executives, all to connect the brand with what truly matters for the consumer, in this case, sustainability. So these are examples of how to connect purpose to the customer experience, and as most high growth brands do, actually measure their purpose. So moving on to the next trend, authentically inclusive marketing, this is almost a double click into the purpose trend. In our survey of global consumers, we found the youngest respondents from 18 to 25 years old took greater notice of inclusive advertising when making purchase decisions. But it's not just about inclusive advertising. It needs to be authentic, right? Our survey shows that 57% of consumers said they are more loyal to brands that commit to addressing social inequities, with numbers even higher for non-white respondents. So that means marketers need to put just as much emphasis behind the camera as they do in front of it. And again, high growth brands are leading the way here. We found the fastest growing brands are committed to achieving equitable outcomes across all their areas of influence, workforce, marketplace, and society, in ways their lower growth peers are not. They measure holistically, and they do it almost everywhere. This includes being 2 times more likely to have DEI-related talent objectives, and they're significantly more likely to have DEI-related metrics pertaining to hiring, community investments, and brand messaging. So what does this look like in practice? For Laura Curtis Ferreira, who is the Global Chief Marketing Officer of Scotiabank, artificial intelligence, or AI, helps to audit messaging and ensure there's always accountability. At Scotiabank, they're really investing in representation or inclusion by design at all levels. And they tried doing it manually, but that was really time consuming, and they realized that they may miss things that way. On top of that, when you add a human, you add bias to the process. So now they do it using AI. Then they have someone whose actual job title is around managing the inclusion by design mandate. So in the end, AI alone may not be the answer, but a hybrid of AI and a dedicated human might be. So now for the final of our people trends, marketing talent models, or as we like to call it, building the intelligent creative engine. And this is a really interesting one because as the speed of customer messaging accelerates across multiple platforms, the role of marketing is becoming increasingly complicated, as I'm sure you know. Within the organization, this environment is changing the skills makeup and processes of the marketing function. And outside the organization, marketers should find ways to keep pace with an ever-changing landscape. In our executive survey, we found something that would be very unlikely just a few years ago. Analytical skills are more sought after than creative skills. But this is not an argument that marketers are no longer prioritizing creative. Rather, it tells us that they will have to find ways to integrate these two skills together. In our executive interviews, we found that many marketing organizations are ditching linear production lines in favor of agile pods of creatives, data scientists, and strategists. They focus on specific customer issues, find the insights, and develop creative around those specific customer moments. So we had a ton of really great interviews around this topic, and I'll share a few with you. This first example speaks to the internal organization piece. In an interview with Megan Nemeth, the Senior Vice President of Marketing at Loblaw Companies Limited, which is Canada's food and pharmacy leader and the nation's largest retailer, she shared that she believes in taking an approach to organizational structure where different skills are brought together to solve a single problem. From a structural standpoint, it's hard to teach lateral thinking. So one way to compensate where you may not have that naturally is to build pods where you have a data science person, a data engineering team, graphic designers, and a demand gen team connected so that you get different thinking on one problem. If your objective is to attract more customers into your retail environment, what are all the signals or moments along the way that would shift their journey? For Loblaw, that objective may be to understand the varying consideration points to entering its retail stores. It may mean if customers are heading to a different store, reminding them through an advertisement that they have better pricing, or intervening in digital when they're searching for a store location. And a complication related to bringing different skills together that surfaced during interviews is actually around global consistency. So the chief communications officer of a Netherlands-based financial firm told us, the most effective and future-proof approach to global marketing is not centralized nor decentralized, but about increasing coherence across markets while allowing for flexibility. He said it can be achieved by setting up global design hubs that allow a local customer experience team not only to download design elements, but also to upload them so that other markets can use them as well. So shifting gears a bit, because talent isn't just limited to internal functions, one of the most interesting trends we're seeing are the new ways social influencers are being used. Rather than just treating them as product spokespeople, as you're probably used to, some brands are looking at them through an agency model lens. They're actually giving them creative briefs and asking them to execute on the ideas because they know these individuals probably have a stronger relationship with their customers than any other organization ever could. Through our interviews, we actually learned that a very large gaming company provides briefs to known influencers in their target demographics and asks them to assist in developing creative content. And the last bit of advice I'll offer related to this trend, we got from an interview with the head of marketing and brand strategy at an Australian-based bank. He believes you can't just pick influencers because they're famous, you have to pick one that has the right interest and has the right following. And then you can give them a fair bit of freedom in terms of how they create content. This means making sure they know the subject matter. So in his case, that they know financial well-being really well. So that does it for our people trends. If you have questions or comments, I'll ask that you save them for the end. Now I'll pass it over to Tim, who will cover our data and experience trends.
Okay, thank you very much, Giselle. What I think is really interesting about those people ones is when we actually created this report, we don't look at people data experiences as mutually exclusive. They're very interdependent, right? And we like to start with those people topics because that's kind of the foundation of every organization. But the next two that I'll cover are data trends. And I really like these because they're kind of two sides of the same coin. And the first one, meeting customers in a cookieless world, really takes an organizational view, and then the next one will take more of the consumer view. So for the first one, what we did, and Giselle mentioned, we've seen a lot of different stuff, or a lot of different behavior between high growth brands and negative growth brands. And first-party cookie strategies, absolutely the case. So we all know that third-party cookies are sunsetting. The speed of that, there's a lot of debate around. And it quite frankly matters what part of the world you're from as far as how fast that's happening. But here's something that we did find out, that high growth companies, they're already shifting a lot faster than their negative growth peers. In fact, 61% of high growth brands said that they've already shifted to a first party data strategy, while only 40% of negative growth. And while that's interesting, what I think is even more important is this part that high growth brands are actually already deploying more sophisticated use cases. So if you're familiar with first party cookies, right, that's just the data that your company owns. So a natural first step for most is if you're saying, look, we're only going to use our first party data to optimize email. That's kind of the low hanging fruit of this. But high growth brands are actually looking at more sophisticated use cases and already deploying them. So they're more likely to have dynamic creative optimization as an example. And they're also more likely to have programmatic media. And I think that that's really interesting, not because we just know that, but what's the roadmap for others to get there? And there's a few different pieces that we learned from a number of our interviews. And the first part is you need to cultivate your own unique first party data, right? Sounds easier said than done, but there's a few different things. One, looking at building out your data infrastructure. That could be something like a customer data platform, or quite frankly, some people say, look, if we just have the right data lake, we can put all the data in there and then figure out our own way to connect it. But it's that idea of understanding what are the different touch points of the customer journey from the data that we have and building ideas off of that. The second one is exchanging more value for your data. And that can be in new offers, more personalized services, and actually doing it very transparently, which we'll get into in our next trend, is really core to that. Finally, sometimes you need to think about just building deeper relationships with ecosystem partners. That could be something like the big ones, like Google, Facebook, whatever it might be, so that you have these walled gardens that you have access to. So that's a little bit more about the partnership side, but also other strategies you are really picking up. One example is retail media buying, which if you aren't familiar, it's kind of like having a advertisement that you might see in the store just on a digital billboard, so to speak. So that's a really interesting way because you can actually go on, let's say, a large vendor and have that advertisement on there for, something like a Target or whatever it might be. And then finally, in this one, rethink your analytics. I find this one interesting because it's almost like going retro. And what I mean by that is we've been gravitating so much to highly personalized, highly timed out content. But people are saying that you might have to start shifting to more analytical strategies of the last maybe 10 years ago, right? So more propensity models where you create segmentation, almost getting at the heart of what marketers are really known for. And what a lot of these individuals are finding is that they're just as successful as these highly personalized things. And I'll get into this a lot in a second, but there's a suspicion, right, that people, unless they explicitly ask for it, don't want that kind of big brother feeling with their data either, right? So instead of saying, here's all the different places that this person's been on the internet, and now we're going to put this specific ad in front of them, there's this piece about saying, here's a group of people that have like-minded interests, right? They like the NFL, they like knitting, whatever it might be. And just understanding at that level is a beautiful way to actually get the right message in front of them without having that creepy factor over them. And I think that that's a great transition for our next trend. And I'm biased, but I think this is what I'll call our most fun trend. We've spent a lot of time talking about what executives think, but this one I think really gets to the heart of what consumers think. And what we actually did for it is we created 10 data scenarios where we'd ask people to rate them how creepy or helpful they find those scenarios. So I'll give you the highest creepy scored scenario, which probably a lot of us can relate to some degree. It goes something like, I'm talking to a friend about coffee and moments later an advertisement for coffee shows up on my social media feed. And actually 53% of consumers said that they found that creepy. And I don't know why, but it was actually, I thought it would be much higher than that. I mean, maybe I'm just going off of personal experience here, but people in the US actually did rate it a bit higher than 53%. I think they were around 71%. So other parts of the world didn't have quite the creepy feeling as we did stateside. But, well, that's interesting. What we really did with this trend is we took those scenarios and behind the scenes, we actually categorized them so that we could actually start looking for trends within it. And the idea is, could we help marketers get a little bit of a roadmap where they could say, here's the types of scenarios that people find helpful. Here's the types of scenarios that, look, it's really mixed. You need to be really towing the line of how you're doing it. And then here's just the ones that they find absolutely creepy. And I'll give you just a few high-level themes from it. First of all, almost every single time that we put in a scenario with, I'll call it more in-depth tracking, you might call it invasive. I think both are really fair. But examples like that could be like the third-party cookies that we just spoke about. Geo-tracking, right? So that idea, let's say you're on a trip in the mountains and you suddenly receive an advertisement about snow tires, right? That was definitely high up there. And then the next one would be, of course, that idea of active, at least perceived device listening was absolutely the worst. Instead, people just wanted to have a deeper relationship with the brand. And what I mean by that is they're very open to customized recommendations. They were very open to offers, right, that go off of their explicit interaction with the brand, right? Those sort of things people are very open to. But as soon as you start putting in those in-depth tracking pieces, people definitely start pushing away from it and rebelling against it. And one thing that we found is that there's a few different pieces of this. One, of course, it needs to start with those strong relationships that you need to build and cultivate before jumping into those in-depth forms. So it's not just jump right into the more invasive forms just because you can. If you don't have the strong relationships, those will not only be ineffective, but they'll actually turn people away. The next piece, and this is really from our conversations with executives, is that it's really changed the CMO dynamic with their security teams. And in fact, one individual that we were talking to, she mentioned that 5 years ago, the only thing that she thought of for her chief information security officer was, and she was joking a bit, right, is the idea of like, hey, I can't get into my computer because my password expired. Can you help me? And she said that a bit tongue in cheek, but her point is now it's a completely different relationship, that they actually work hand in hand in building these customer experiences for a few reasons. One, to make sure that if we're using this data, that we're using it in a secure, safe way, and they can confidently report that back to their customers through honest communications. But then two, it was also to prevent misuse even internally, right? So that idea of, look, if we don't track maybe these more invasive pieces, some person in the organization can't use that and deploy it in a way that we know will actually hurt the brand. So I thought that was a really interesting piece that we heard over and over again, is this idea that I'll call it the CISO and CMO relationship is certainly much stronger, and they're actually part of designing the customer experience, which I think is pretty interesting. So our last two trends really deal with experience. And I think this one's really timely because we're all doing a hybrid experience right now, right? And I'll give you the stat that I think is maybe not that interesting, but then some information behind it. So when we were developing these executive surveys, it was back in the spring. And one thing that we said is we need to have questions around hybrid experience. And one of them was, do you just plan on investing in hybrid experiences more over the next 12 months? The unsurprising thing is 75% said yes. And obviously COVID is very real right now, but at the time we really thought that this would be highly motivated by COVID. So whenever somebody said yes, we asked them, why are you doing this? And the thought that we had is the number one reason would be to provide a safer experience. That actually came in at second lowest. And instead, the top three things were to create more personalization, greater innovation, and I think what our hybrid experience that we're all living right now in this call is to help more people connect. And we found that really interesting because we said maybe COVID was the catalyst for hybrid experiences, but along the way, brands found a lot more benefits outside of that. And those are the driving reasons for investing more in the future. So while we don't know when COVID will exactly end, we know that it will have an end date. And these brands are actually investing in it for reasons that are more long-term, not short fixes to bridge a gap. And there's a few things that we talked about in this one, which was really how one could use human-centered design to create that more personalization. And really at the core of that is embedding feedback mechanisms along the way. And we spoke to a number of people that are doing really interesting things with this. One example is a large grocer in the UK. They originally started offering mobile checkouts where you could actually just scan your items right in the store and check out. But they found that people actually found that to be way more tedious than just going up to a cashier and having them do it. So they started putting in feedback mechanisms to understand, one, why aren't they using the mobile experience? And two, what could they offer more? And then that's when they started learning other things that they needed to do. So that was things like adding more, actually integrating their loyalty program right into the app, right? So that people can just cross-reference that and use it. To providing dietary recommendations based on people's personal preferences that they get to self-select into for meals, things of that nature. And then finally, making it a very simple choice for them to, or very simple feedback piece for them to say, what's a better experience at the end? Checking out with a human being or checking out over the mobile app? And when they understand that, they can actually start segmenting preferences, right? Understanding what types of individuals gravitate towards the mobile versus the cashier, and actually prompting those individuals to tell them which aisles are open, things of that nature, which for the people that prefer those mobile checkouts, or sorry, those in-person checkouts. And same thing with the healthcare company, right? Telehealth, incredibly popular right now. And of course, there's a little bit of a bifurcation there, right? A lot of people enjoy telehealth for, or I shouldn't say enjoy, prefer telehealth for maybe more routine types of services, right? I have a cold and I need to talk to my doctor. There's this short thing, but right, when you actually need to go in, you want to have that personal touch and make sure that it's congruent with those experiences. And they started putting in feedback mechanisms along that entire system, where it could be as simple as just a button asking how the experience was, to asking people what they would prefer for what types of experiences. So we thought those were really interesting examples that we can't just throw a bunch of different channels out there and hope that they work. We need to actually make sure that we're getting either explicit or passive feedback so that we can just keep iterating on these experiences and designing them in a way that people do find that they're congruent and personalized and helpful. Our last one, supercharging customer service with AI. We started off with the consumer side again. And when we asked this next question, it really wasn't intended for this topic. It kind of just led us to it based on a few different data points. What we did is we actually gave people 8 different categories that we asked, did you make a purchase in any of these categories? And it could be something like beauty and personal care. It could be automotive, electronics, banking and finance. And they had to do it in the last month. And anybody that said yes, we asked them to really think about that experience. And we gave them a few options saying, did anything help you make your purchase? In other words, was there anything that was kind of this purchase nudge? And it could be anything like you could picture for automotive, a virtual showroom, right? That might be helpful. It could be something like customized recommendations. It could be or an easy cancellation policy, return policy, free trial, all those sort of things. But 2 things consistently rose to the top. And the first one was timely offers. The second one was knowledgeable customer service. And for both of these, we realized they don't need to be done in a vacuum. Timely offers are regularly, especially now after all the discussion that we just had about data, are driven by AI, by algorithms, right? And knowledgeable customer service isn't a chatbot. That's a human being actually being helpful for you. And we found that we're seeing in other data that there's a real opportunity to bring these 2 together. So it's not replace your customer agent with an algorithm. It's about actually equipping them with that information so that they can be better at their job, so that they can offer the most helpful recommendations when they're talking to somebody. And actually, we have a contact center survey, and right, so that's usually about post-purchase service. And we found, especially there where you have human agents, chatbots, whatever it might be, self-service, is that executives, more than half of all executives are planning to shift from looking at that as the cost center to a revenue generator. And the reason why we bring that up is having something like AI be that contact center nudge can be incredibly useful for both the brand and for the customer. And there's a few different examples that we have, and it could be contact centers or just customer service in general. One that I thought was really, we actually have 2 different ones from hospitality companies. One is Crown Resorts out of Australia. They're their biggest, gaming, cruise, hoteling company in the country. And they've actually started looking at their platinum members, so their best customers, ones that they have information across all these different properties. They're spending a lot of money there every year. And they've started equipping frontline staff where when they give their platinum membership card or whatever it might be, is that they know certain pieces of that person to enhance the experience. So here's a really simple one, right? It doesn't even take an algorithm, but it said it was one of their first ones and most effective. Is just when it's somebody's birthday and they know that, not only wishing them a happy birthday, but giving them something special, maybe a bottle of wine on the house, right? And then they said they could go even further with that, where it could be something like, and of course, with people opting in and making sure that this is transparent, that they get this, right? But if they did a certain experience, saying like, hey, we'd like to offer you this additional experience on the house, because they know that people generally go from one experience to the other. Another great example was a different hospitality company that actually used it in their contact centers. So an example would be you're booking a trip, you're booking all of these experiences, and you're having an issue on the site, right? So you call up customer service, something that usually we don't even want to do, right? We want to complete it on the site at that point. And they have it where the service agent not only knew where the person was most recently left on and what they were doing, but they could fix their issue, and only when appropriate, give a recommendation on additional experiences that they could try while they're on their vacation. So I think those two are really interesting ones. And then the last one that I'll leave you with is a business-to-business example. And it's a B2B technology company. And they started doing that with their contact centers, where if somebody calls up about an issue, that they can not only solve that issue, but they can recommend future actions they can take, right? Maybe you want to do this firm update to enhance your security, whatever it might be, so that it's not just this isolated problem where somebody's learning about it, fixing it on the spot, but they already have the next best step that they can help make that a better experience for that customer. So those are really the pieces that we have across these trends. And there's a few different things I'd like to say. One, I have the QR code up here, and please feel free to scan that. I guess you're in a room, so that might not be as practical. But if you go to Deloitte.com/global marketing trends, you not only have access to the full report, but we have a few other assets I think are really interesting. One, the actual the page is interactive. So we threw a lot of data at you. It probably was a little bit overwhelming at times, but you can actually go on that page and you can not only see the data, but you can interact with it. You can filter by industry, by country, by how our CMO responses versus maybe other members of the C-suite. So you can get a little bit more of a customized view there. But two, if you actually scroll all the way to the bottom, you can actually see that you can get a customized data report. We have 30 different cuts of it where you can actually say, you know what, I would love to see this data just by the consumer industry, or maybe financial services or healthcare, whatever it might be. Same thing with by role, business to business versus B2C and revenue size. So there's a lot of different ways to explore these trends. And I know we just threw a lot of information at you over 30 minutes, but one, we'd love to take questions now, and two, encourage you to read more about it. So with that being said, I would love to open up for any questions.
Thank you. Great. And just as a note, we do have some additional materials and links that we'll send in follow-up. So you don't necessarily have to find it all by yourself. Since you all registered, we'll send you stuff directly. So we'll make it easy.
Wonderful.
Yeah. So those of you online, I'm watching the chat. If you type something in, and those of you in the room, please just don't all talk at once. Come on.
I have a question.
Thanks, Martha. Go ahead.
So as far as the creepiness factor, I was wondering if you saw a large difference by age. So like are younger consumers more used to that and more accepting of it and find some of that activity less creepy? And kind of related to that, you see the people in general from, as far as compared to past surveys, are people getting used to it? So are things becoming less creepy feeling to people?
So I can answer the first part, and the second part is to be continued. So the first one, you're absolutely right. And actually on the interactive page, you can pull up these different scenarios and filter it by age. Yes, younger generations are just generally more accepting of it, right? They come from a digitally native generation. And actually, we just broke it up into 3 different categories. It's 18 to 25, so that Gen Z, 26 to 45, and then 46 and older. And even the 26 to 45 didn't have much of a drop on average, right? There's 10 different scenarios here, so it's not blanketly, it's not a blanket statement, but overall, I'd say really under 45, 18 to 45 is pretty open to it, which I found a little bit surprising because while, of course, 45-year-olds also grew up in a digitally native environment, it's not exactly the same as somebody that's 21 right now, right? Especially with social media and everything like that. Your second question, this is our first year actually doing those scenarios. So we'll see if maybe the creepiness goes down a little bit next year. But I think I'd agree with your hypothesis, right? That it will probably mute a little bit, but we might also have to change it to, who knows, maybe more invasive types of scenarios put in there, right? If those things are actually occurring. Right?
Or I guess there could be a question of whether the creepiness is creepy or not might not matter as much as the convenience. Like you start being okay with it because something makes your life easier or better, and then you just
I get what you're saying. So the first time it happens, it happens, it's jarring. The 10th time that it happens, it's helpful. That's a great point.
Basically, just wear them down.
Yes. But what I can say is right now, I can't speak to what will happen after, attempt number 10. But right now, I mean, it's pretty consistent that if it involves geo-tracking, third-party cookies, or even just the perception of device listening, which oftentimes actually isn't the real case, it just feels like that, right? And actually the things that, by my understanding, that actually lead to that feeling are almost just as bad. Those just routinely score lower than not using them.
Got it. Kyle has a question.
Yeah, no, this is a great insight. One of my questions is specific to, can you break down the data even further? And what I mean by that is I would think that some of the results would differ for B2B versus B2C, but also if you're a brand that's local, regional, national, global, I'm thinking hybrid experiences specifically. If I'm a local brand, obviously that's going to be totally different if my customers are global. So I'm curious, can you actually break down the numbers even further?
So the B2B versus B2C, yes, we can. I mean, it would depend on which trend you're talking about, and I couldn't promise you that I could remember the results on it off the top of my head. However, what I will say is I'd be happy to take an attempt, and that's actually one of the data cuts that you can download if you want to just read all of it as well. So you can really deep dive into that piece of it. I get your question on the regional versus global, right, or national, whatever it might be. That's a great question that we don't have that data cut, and we didn't have a great way to capture it. What I can say is every executive that was surveyed was from a global brand. Now, that does not mean that they had global responsibilities.
Okay. Thank you. Audrey has a question.
I have a question around technology. I'm curious to hear what technology trends you found in this survey, and specifically, do you see kind of a digital divide between those companies that are spending more in digital technologies, getting the data together and being able to use some of those AI? I mean, that kind of stuff tends to cost more money. And so I was just curious what you noticed as far as technology trends, for moving forward in marketing.
Sure. I feel like I'm always giving half answers to these questions, but I can answer the first part for you better than the second part. The first part is one of the questions that we actually asked, and I'm going a little bit off of memory here, but I'll be directionally correct, is we asked consumers, just in the last month, have you made any purchases in any of the following channels? And we purposely picked, I'll call them more emerging and not, right? And the one that's probably the least emerging, but still was interesting, is social media. Roughly a third said that they made a purchase through social media over the last month. The next one up, which we were a bit surprised to see, was gaming, right? And that one, I want to say, was roughly 15%. So they did that through gaming. And then two other ones that hovered around, I think, 10% was a voice assistant, right? They used a voice assistant, so Alexa, whatever it might be, Siri, to make a purchase. And then a very low one, but I thought it was still interesting. And by the way, most of this was actually from, I want to say Japan and China, but it was still interesting, was using AR, VR to make a purchase. And so I thought that was actually, while the numbers are low and skewed to a certain region of the world, a really interesting piece. And the reason that I'll bring that up as well is, especially China has been about 5 years ahead of the US by what I can tell, as far as how they're using social media for commerce. And that's anything from small businesses to incredibly large retailers, almost using that as another CRM platform, right? I think, I could be wrong on this naming, but I think they call it social CRM. And the idea that, right, you could picture using Facebook, and I don't know why I use Target again, I guess just because it's a large retailer, right? As that would be one of their primary channels, right, for providing customer service, for conducting transactions, right? So I don't know if there's anything to that AR VR one, but I thought that was really interesting. For your second part about the digital divide for companies, I don't have as strong of an answer on that one.
Okay.
So hopefully I at least nailed the first 50%.
Well, and it makes me, there's a question on the chat that I'm going to read, but it makes me wonder if I'm sure you want to ask a lot of the same questions year after year on this survey to make sure you're really tracking trends. But do you add any questions or change any, like, is that something you could start digging into? Because to me, that's a really big, especially, B2B and, companies figuring out how to capitalize on all this stuff and trying to figure out what to do.
Yeah, absolutely. You're absolutely correct. So I'll tell you, I almost look at this. This is our third annual trends report. From a data piece, I almost look at it as year one. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. First year was almost exclusively interview based for how we came up with the trends and used it. The second year, as we started developing it, was right when I'll say COVID became real for us, right? As a collective society, it was around March, and we had it be very COVID orientated for year two. And year three was kind of the first year where we said, let's just have the data be around general topics that are important to marketers and customer experience leaders. So completely agree. The answer is yes. It's almost like this is year one of what I'd call the foundational data.
Great. Okay, so I'm going to read you a question from the chat from Matt Hollenkamp at St. Elizabeth. He says, great stuff. Can you share more specifically, can you more specifically define purpose? Also, I heard you say that price and quality viewed as commodities. How would you suggest we distinguish activating purpose as you would define it relative to leading with communicating the benefits of our brands, products, services, and then in parentheses, consumers buy benefits because that matters most to them?
Sure. So that's a good question. I'll start with defining purpose, and then I might need to be reminded on some of the last pieces. So purpose, if I was going to very simply state it, it is knowing why you exist and who you serve. And there could be brand purpose and there could be enterprise-wide purpose, right? Brand purpose can be, here's why we provide the products that we have, right? And that could be any number of reasons, right? And here's who those products are for. Enterprise-wide is more what I'd say that we're talking about this, where it's almost like brand is just a subset of it. It's having a congruent message across your organization, across your employees, across your across how you pick your business partners, across how you invest in corporate social responsibility, right? That is, I'd say, enterprise-wide purpose. That's the first part. Second part that I'd say is, it's very topical right now, and it's one of the reasons why we do it, is that purpose is often overlapping with, I'd say, more social issues, right? Sustainability, social inequity, data privacy, or it might be. It doesn't necessarily have to be that. And I think, especially though, if you are going to be that, then your products, your services, your corporate social responsibility really do need to be congruent. That's my understanding of it. But an example that I'll give, and it's a little bit older for me, so my memory has to go back on it, but it was actually a company that sold windows and doors, right? And they really just wanted to help. I'm going to completely butcher their purpose because I haven't thought about it for a few years. Their point was that they wanted to help people reimagine their living space. And they took something kind of mundane like a window and talked about how it could completely change how you see where you live, where you work, whatever it might be. That doesn't have any of, I'll say, the corporate social responsibility piece to it. And they were probably more in the brand purpose piece there. I'm sure that they had corporate social responsibility pieces, but I'm not sure if they aligned or not. Which can bring us to the next piece, the price and quality. The examples there are, of course, price, quality are always going to be top of mind. And we saw that in the survey, right? It's just, people do care about more nuanced things. It could be something like sustainability, addressing social inequities. It could be, like, I want to love my home, right? And I want to love the space that it is and give people that experience, show that this is a part of me and how I identify. And whether it's sustainability matters for those that are under 25 that care about health and beauty, and they want to make sure that their products are represented in those ideas, or if it's the windows and door company, finding the people that look at their home as more than four walls, right, and more this expression of themselves. The idea is that you understand who those people are, what they care about, and you ensure that what you're serving to them is congruent with those beliefs and supports it. And that's how you can get away from the more table stakes of, look, my price is right, my quality is right. I don't know if that answers the question, but that's my 2-minute ramble on it.
Okay, well, Matt will have to let us know on the chat if there's any nuance he wants to follow up on, or anyone else. That's the only question I see on the chat right now. So I'm going to look at the other end of the table for a change. I realized I keep looking this way. I apologize. Any questions down here? Thoughts or observations? Okay, Will's got one right here.
As it relates to purpose, is there any additional information that was gathered in the survey that could help advise brands how to internally and externally promote DEI? And as it relates to external marketing, is there information about how consumers would react to bad instances of DEI being used from a representation standpoint and things like that?
Yeah, I'll try to answer that one. From the internal piece, and I'll actually say it was other research done by Deloitte that we leveraged, so we didn't dig into it, but it went, although we did see it in the high growth brands followed this trend, this pattern, is that internally, it was incredibly important to be congruent. And that goes back to the purpose piece, right? And it's this idea that purpose or diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives can't be done in a vacuum. And so what I mean by that is, for instance, high growth brands were more likely to have talent retention objectives, hiring objectives. They were more likely to have brand messaging objectives, which I could get into that in a second, and then their community investments, and then also how it inspired their product and service delivery in the sense that, are they actually putting out inclusive products into the market? And across all of those things I mentioned, there's really three pieces. There's kind of three patterns that need to be congruent there. Your talent, your marketplace offerings, and your societal and your society interactions, right? So community interactions in that case. As far as what are certain tactics, let's say, that they ensure that they have the right talent retention, higher objectives. We didn't get too much into that. I'd have to think back. I'm sure our interview spoke to it. I just don't quite remember well, I'll give one, which actually came up in our talent article a little bit, was the value of remote work. And it was actually for a beauty products company out of Utah, Unique, is what they're called, I believe YOU, NIQUE. And they were talking about, like, they're in Utah, it's incredibly homogenous group of people, right? And they always had trouble finding more diverse talent because of that. But remote work actually really opened that for them. And they said that, you know, they never planned on being a remote work company, but it was one of the main benefits that they had when they were forced to go to it. And it's something that's going to stick with them forever. So I realize that's just kind of one thing in a vacuum, but it's one that sticks out to me. Now that I rambled on that, I know there was a second half of that question, but I don't remember what it was. Could you repeat it?
Yeah, if there's any data that you guys gathered as it relates to consumers and external marketing kind of initiatives, consumers reacting poorly to kind of bad implementation of DEI, you know, brands, maybe they're scared to do it externally because they might get it wrong. Is there any repercussions you saw within the consumer base there?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I mean, one that I've heard a lot of different opinions on, but you're asking for data. And from the data piece of it, I can't give you a consumer piece, but there is a study, and I'm trying to remember if it's done by Deloitte. It wasn't done by our team. I could find it for you, provide it with you, but they actually analyzed like thousands of advertisements. And what they did is they actually categorized them and basically scored them on how inclusive they are. Not only what the faces are inside those advertisements, but how they're represented, right? And they did find at least a correlation between, I want to say, I can't remember if it was stock price or revenue. Once again, this isn't my study. And how inclusive those advertisements were, right? That's one half of it. The other half is how consistent are you and how authentic is it, right? You could have a really wise marketer. And that's what we tried to get to a little bit in our study, which was that people actually expect that sustained commitment, right? So that's where we think the authenticity comes into it. So I don't know, maybe that was a 50% answer on that one too.
If you think of that study, feel free to send it. We'll share it in the.
I absolutely can. I can find it. I just don't remember the exact specifics around it, but I'll definitely look into it. It was pretty interesting stuff that helped us. Now, what I think it's called the heat index, and it is called the heat index, but I'll find the actual study itself.
Okay, thank you. I still don't see any other questions online.
Martha.
Oh, no, yeah.
Good.
All right.
Suzanne.
So I know, so thinking about the AI powered tool that Scotiabank used, in reference to authentically inclusive marketing, and it seemed like there's, you know, some skepticism that AI was the sole answer, but I think it was really interesting in that insight from the person from Scotiabank that having a human introduces bias in that process or in that review process, but one of the AI tool be created by a human anyway. And so therefore have implicit bias built in regard, you know, so I just mostly, I'm curious if there was more in that insight, if you wanted to share or could share, or and kind of commenting further on using AI to evaluate authentically inclusive marketing.
Yeah, I can give just a little bit more. The piece was that they wanted to create this inclusivity by design, and it wasn't just the marketing messages, right? That was across their entire organization. But we're speaking about that, and they said, you know, there were two pieces of it, right? Both have inherent bias, and they thought if we can actually create a dedicated team that's trained on this, we can be better at it. The one part is, if you just leave it up to the marketers, give them guidelines, right? Here's the things that we believe our advertising should represent. Right? That provides decentralized and human bias, right? You're really leaning on every individual to follow it and interpret it as they put out there. The other part is, well, let's just use AI that can look at the imagery and basically score it, right? Almost similar to that heat index, although it was completely unrelated to it by my understanding. They just independently tried to go with that. But as we've seen from so many different things outside of that, is that biased data can result in biased outcomes, right? From prison recidivism to facial recognition software, whatever it might be. And so what they actually said is like, let's try to use both of these. And we're going to have people whose full-time job is to review this information. And we believe that they're properly trained, equipped to at least mitigate their bias. Right? And then we're also going to use AI and kind of marry those two up. And I couldn't get into the exact inner workings of that process, but they were basically trying to acknowledge that it can be biased from two fronts, but if they have people whose job it is versus a decentralized process, it hopefully mitigates it there. And then two, to have kind of this AI assist to at least flag ones, right? That's a better process than leaning too much on one side or the other. So I guess in their own way, it's kind of not physical digital hybrid, but hybrid in methods, right?
Great, thank you.
Yeah, and then Giselle, are you still able to pop on and share what you shared in the chat, or should I read it?
Yeah, no, I'm sorry, I'm going back to maybe like 4 questions ago, but the question related to kind of marketing tech / AI trends just sparked my memory. We also work with the CMO survey, and this report that I've included here could offer some interesting information related to AI and ML spend, or AI and ML and optimizing marketing efforts. Just another survey that we do, not related to global marketing trends, but I did want to offer it up.
Okay, great. I'm clicking on it so that I can then include it in our follow-up.
Great.
Yeah, thank you. I've got it here on my phone.
Martha, did you have another question?
Yeah, I mean, just was interested in a little bit more information. I was really fascinated by the intelligent creative engine and the pods that you talked about. And I was just wondering if there was more to say there, or kind of like how you see those very distinct disciplines actually collaborating with each other versus just handing off to each other. And just was curious kind of more about that topic in general.
Yes, I could give a little bit on that. That was, I believe, with Megan Namath. She's the one that spoke to us about that. And I'm going to blur this a little bit, but what they did is, instead of basically saying, here's our product manager, and here's our creative team, and here's our data science team, and data science team finds the insights, is they actually organize them around very specific business objectives, right? So it could be, having people add more to their basket, right? Or it could be getting people into the store. I'm probably making them a little bit too generic at this point, right? But instead you had teams built around that. So you'd actually put the data scientist on the team for getting people into the store and say, here's how they commute on average. Here's when people are considering going to the grocery store. And they'd work with the creatives to say, here's the exact point where the decision is being made, right? And maybe give them a little bit around intentions, piece like that. And then say, design around that moment for it. And they'd be just part of the same team that maybe it's, we're the team that's trying to just get people into the store, right? And then likewise, it's, we have somebody in the store, it's a completely different team, right? And it would be, how do we, increase dairy consumption? I don't know why I picked dairy. Maybe it's because I'm from Wisconsin. That, right? But they'd be given very specific problems like that, I remember, and that's how the pods would be built around. So it was kind of more, here's the unique objective that we're all going towards, versus we all have kind of our own wheelhouse of expertise, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you.
Great. Any other hands raised here in the room? Megan's running to get her charger because now the latest is that the battery is running low on the laptop we're running. So if you just disappear, thank you. But we do have, I just see Matt asked another question here online, and maybe we can call this the last one. Any perspective or data to what the future marketing department or organization should look like, the best structure, roles, etc.?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the reason why I chuckle a little bit is this is one of our next research projects that we're looking to tackle right now. So I don't have a great answer for you, Matt. Hopefully I do in about 3 months from now, or at least an okay answer. I mean, one thing we are hearing a lot is those agile talent pods are pretty big. So we mentioned that, that's just a little piece of it. The other one that we're looking into is who the CMO should be collaborating with most. Actually, this is a completely different study, but we found that CMOs, when you look across the C-suite for CFO, CEO, well, I'll take CEO out of it, CFO, COO, CIO, CHRO, that CMOs collaborate the least with other C-suite members. So we're looking into that, right? Which ones should be kind of their close collaborators. And we're actually doing this, we just started this interesting study where we're going to be working with some people that maybe have deployed some pretty transformational work, right? Not even just, in message, but in actually customer experience. And we're actually going to be conducting a series of in-depth interviews to understand how they actually structure themselves. So I don't have that answer yet, but to be continued on that one.
All right, so keep your eye on Deloitte, I guess, is the answer.
So we're very much interested in the same question, maybe what I should say.
Yeah. Great. Okay, I guess last call for questions. I think that's probably our time anyway. So thank you, Giselle and Tim, once again. Very interesting. I have a feeling people will be digging in on the customized site. And maybe someday we can meet you in person, but for now, we're glad we're able to squeak by with getting you to people's ears and some eyeballs virtually.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you all so much for your patience and your participation. Sometimes we just have to roll with the blows with technology. It is what it is. I'd like to quickly thank.
On our end, it went great.
Oh yeah, it all came together eventually. I also want to quickly thank our investors, Von Lehman, Humana, and Dement Consulting for their investment in the Leadership Roundtable program. And of course, our partners with the AMA and Dennis and Gina for all they do with the CMO Roundtable. They're fantastic. If you have any questions about the Leadership Roundtable program, let me know and I'm always here to help.
All right. Yeah, I think, are we done, Dennis?
Yep.
I think we're done. And I think we'll probably let the online folks go because we don't have a good way of facilitating